The rejection letter felt heavier than the rifle she could field strip in under 30 seconds. Staff Sergeant Maria Santos stared at the official military letterhead, the words blurring together as her dreams of frontline deployment dissolved before her eyes. Request denied due to current combat exclusion policies for female personnel. The language was clinical, cold, and final. Maria had known this moment would come, but knowing didn't make it hurt any less. She folded the letter carefully and placed it in her desk drawer, right next to the marksmanship awards that covered nearly every surface of her small base quarters. Expert marksman, distinguished rifle qualification, top scores in every shooting competition she had ever entered. None of it seemed to matter when it came to the one thing she wanted most, the chance to serve alongside her fellow Marines in active combat. Growing up in East Los Angeles, Maria had learned to shoot from her grandfather, a Korean War veteran who saw something special in the way she held a rifle. While other kids played video games, she spent weekends at the shooting range, learning to control her breathing, steady her hands, and find that perfect moment of stillness between heartbeats when the shot becomes inevitable. Her grandfather never treated her differently because she was a girl. He simply taught her to be the best marksman she could be. When Maria enlisted in the Marines at 18, she carried with her not just exceptional shooting skills, but an unwavering determination to prove herself in a male-dominated world. Boot camp had been brutal, but she thrived under pressure. Her drill instructors quickly recognized her natural leadership abilities and her uncanny accuracy with virtually every weapon they put in her hands. She could hit targets at distances that made seasoned Marines shake their heads in disbelief. But talent and determination could only take her so far in a military structure that simply didn't allow women in direct combat roles. For 6 years, Maria had watched as her male counterparts deployed to Iraq and Afghanistan while she remained stateside, training new recruits and maintaining equipment. She excelled at everything they gave her to do, but it wasn't what she had signed up for. She wanted to serve where it mattered most, where her skills could make a real difference in keeping her fellow Marines alive. The morning after receiving the rejection letter, Maria reported to the training range as usual. Captain James Morrison, her commanding officer, found her there at dawn, methodically working through ammunition with the kind of focused intensity that had become her trademark. Each shot found its mark with mechanical precision, even as her frustration simmered beneath the surface. Morrison had been watching Maria's career with interest. He had seen plenty of good soldiers come and through his command, but few with her combination of skill, dedication, and quiet leadership. The rejection of her deployment request bothered him almost as much as it bothered her. He knew that somewhere in Afghanistan, Marines were dying because they didn't have someone with her abilities watching their backs. Santos, Morrison called out as she finished her morning routine. She turned, snapping to attention with the crisp efficiency that defined everything she did. I want to talk to you about some new opportunities that might interest you. Morrison had been working behind the scenes, looking for ways to get Maria the deployment she deserved without directly challenging the combat exclusion policies that kept getting in the way. The military was slowly beginning to recognize that modern warfare didn't always follow traditional front lines. In places like Afghanistan, the distinction between combat and support roles was becoming increasingly meaningless. Every convoy could become a firefight. Every supply run could turn deadly. He had found what he was looking for in a new program that embedded specially trained personnel with frontline units in support roles. Officially, they wouldn't be in direct combat positions. Unofficially, everyone knew that in a place like Helmand Province, there was no such thing as a safe rear area. It was the closest thing to a combat deployment that Maria was going to get, and Morrison was determined to make it happen. As he explained the opportunity, Maria felt something she hadn't experienced in years: hope. The assignment would put her with Marine units operating in some of the most dangerous territory in Afghanistan. Her official role would be training and support, but Morrison made it clear that she would be expected to use all of her skills when the situation demanded it. It wasn't the frontline combat position she had originally requested, but it was a chance to finally serve where her abilities could make a difference. The paperwork for the new assignment moved through channels with surprising speed. Morrison had called in favors, and made arguments to anyone who would listen. He emphasized Maria's exceptional marksmanship scores, her leadership potential, and the unique value she could bring to units operating in complex environments where traditional gender roles meant less than survival skills. Maria threw herself into preparation for deployment with the same intensity she brought to everything else. She studied the terrain of Helmand Province, memorized the tactical challenges facing Marine units in the region, and pushed her physical conditioning to new levels. She knew she would have to prove herself all over again once she arrived in Afghanistan, and she was determined to be ready for whatever challenges awaited her. The night before her departure, Maria sat in her quarters writing letters to her family. Her mother had never fully understood her decision to join the Marines, but she had always supported her daughter's dreams. Her grandfather, now in his 80s, had called to offer one final piece of advice that he had learned in the frozen hills of Korea. Trust your training, trust your instincts, and never hesitate when lives are on the line. As she sealed the letters and finished packing her gear, Maria felt the weight of responsibility settling on her shoulders. She knew that her performance in Afghanistan would be scrutinized more closely than any male Marines. She would have to be not just good, but exceptional. Failure wasn't an option, not just for her own career, but for every woman who might follow in her footsteps. The transport plane that would take her to Afghanistan was scheduled to depart at dawn. Maria lay in her bunk that final night, staring at the ceiling and thinking about the journey that had brought her to this moment. From the shooting ranges of East Los Angeles to the training fields of Camp Pendleton, every step had been leading to this opportunity. She had faced rejection and, overcome it, had proven herself again and again in environments designed to test her limits. Tomorrow she would finally get the chance to serve alongside Marines in one of the world's most dangerous combat zones. She didn't know what challenges awaited her in the mountains and valleys of Afghanistan, but she knew she was as ready as training and determination could make her. The rejection letter was still in her desk drawer, but it no longer defined her future. She had found another path, and she was finally going to war. The alarm clock buzzed at 0400 hours, but Maria was already awake, her gear packed, and her mind focused on the mission ahead. As she made her way to the transport area in the pre-dawn darkness, she carried with her not just her weapons and equipment, but the hopes and doubts of everyone who had ever questioned whether a woman belonged in combat. In a few hours, she would begin the deployment that would test everything she believed about herself and everything the military believed about the role of women in war. The heat hit Maria like a physical blow as she stepped off the transport plane onto the tarmac at Camp Leatherneck. Even at 6 in the morning, the Afghan sun was already beginning its relentless assault on everything and everyone in Helmand Province. The air tasted of dust and diesel fuel, with an underlying metallic tang that she would later learn came from the constant presence of weapons and ammunition in a place where violence was always just one heartbeat away. Camp Leatherneck sprawled across the desert like a small city, protected by concrete barriers, razor wire, and the constant vigilance of Marines who had learned that in Afghanistan, safety was always temporary and never guaranteed. Maria shouldered her pack and followed the other new arrivals toward the processing center, her eyes already adjusting to the harsh brightness and her mind cataloging every detail of her new environment. The culture shock began almost immediately. As she moved through the base, Maria could feel the stares and whispers that followed in her wake. Female Marines weren't entirely uncommon at Leatherneck, but most served in clearly defined support roles: medical, intelligence, logistics. The idea of a woman with Maria's combat training and marksmanship credentials joining a frontline unit was something many of these Marines had never encountered before. Lieutenant Colonel David Hayes, the commanding officer who would oversee her integration with combat units, greeted Maria with professional courtesy tinged with obvious skepticism. Hayes was a career Marine who had earned his rank through multiple deployments in Iraq and Afghanistan. He had seen plenty of good soldiers come and go, and he had learned to judge people by their actions rather than their reputations. Maria's file was impressive, but files didn't stop bullets or save lives in firefights. Santos, I'm going to be straight with you, Hayes said as they walked toward the briefing room where she would learn about her new assignment. There are a lot of people watching this deployment very closely. Some are hoping you'll succeed, others are waiting for you to fail. My job is to make sure you get a fair chance to prove yourself, but I need you to understand that fair doesn't mean easy. The Marines you'll be working with have been through hell together, and they're not going to accept you just because some paper says you're qualified. Maria appreciated his directness. She had expected skepticism and was prepared to face it head-on. Sir, I understand. I'm not asking for special treatment. I just want a chance to do my job and prove that I belong here. The briefing that followed painted a sobering picture of the challenges facing Marine units in Helmand Province. The Taliban had been increasing their attacks on coalition forces, using increasingly sophisticated tactics and weapons. Improvised explosive devices hidden along supply routes claimed lives almost daily. Sniper attacks from concealed positions in the rugged terrain made every patrol a deadly game of cat and mouse. The Marines needed every advantage they could get, and Maria's exceptional marksmanship skills could potentially provide that edge. Her first assignment would be with Bravo Company, a unit that had been in country for 4 months and had already lost 3 Marines to enemy action. The company commander, Captain Michael Rodriguez, was a decorated veteran who had earned the respect of his men through aggressive leadership and an unwavering commitment to bringing everyone home alive. Rodriguez had requested additional sniper support after his unit had been targeted repeatedly by Taliban marksmen operating from fortified positions in the mountains surrounding their area of operations. When Maria arrived at Bravo Company's forward operating base the next morning, she was met with a mixture of curiosity and suspicion from the Marines who would become her new teammates. Sergeant First Class Tony Mitchell, the unit's senior non-commissioned officer, had served 3 previous tours in Afghanistan and had seen enough combat to last several lifetimes. His weathered face and steady eyes reflected the kind of hard-earned wisdom that came from surviving in places where mistakes meant death. Mitchell pulled Maria aside for what he called an orientation conversation, but which was actually a careful evaluation disguised as small talk. He wanted to gauge her attitude, her confidence level, and, most importantly, her ability to function under the kind of pressure that turns some Marines into heroes and others into casualties. Santos, I've read your file, and I've talked to people who know your work, Mitchell said as they walked the perimeter of the small base. Your shooting scores are impressive, but this isn't a target range. The enemy shoots back here, and they're pretty good at it. I need to know that you can handle yourself when things go sideways, because they always go sideways eventually. Maria had heard variations of this conversation before, and she knew that her response would be carefully analyzed and reported back to the rest of the unit. Sergeant, I understand your concerns. I know I have to prove myself, and I'm ready to do that. I didn't come here to make a statement or break barriers. I came here to be a Marine and to help keep our people alive. Over the following days, Maria began the careful process of integration with a unit that functioned as a tight-knit family. She observed the informal hierarchy that existed alongside the official chain of command, learned the unwritten rules that govern daily life in a combat zone, and gradually began to earn the grudging respect of Marines who had initially viewed her arrival with suspicion. Her first real test came during a routine patrol that quickly became anything but routine. Bravo Company was tasked with establishing a checkpoint on a road frequently used by Taliban fighters moving weapons and supplies. The mission seemed straightforward. Set up the checkpoint, search vehicles, and gather intelligence on enemy movements in the area. But in Afghanistan, even simple missions had a way of becoming complex very quickly. Maria was positioned as part of the Overwatch team, responsible for providing cover for the Marines manning the checkpoint. Her job was to scan the surrounding terrain for threats and engage any enemy positions that might threaten the patrol. It was exactly the kind of role that played to her strengths as a marksman while officially keeping her in a support rather than direct combat position. The attack came without warning, as they always did. One moment the patrol was conducting routine vehicle searches. The next moment the air was filled with the distinctive crack of incoming rifle fire. Taliban fighters had positioned themselves in the rocky hills overlooking the road, and they had waited patiently for the perfect moment to spring their ambush. Maria's training kicked in immediately. While other Marines scrambled for cover and tried to locate the source of the incoming fire, she was already scanning the hillside through a rifle scope, looking for muzzle flashes and movement that would reveal enemy positions. The Taliban had chosen their positions well, using natural rock formations and scraggly vegetation to conceal their firing points. The first enemy fighter Maria spotted was approximately 600 meters away, partially concealed behind a boulder and firing down at the Marines near the checkpoint. Through her scope, she could see the distinctive muzzle flash each time he fired, and she could track the slight movement of his position as he adjusted his aim between shots. This was the moment she had trained for throughout her entire military career. Maria controlled her breathing, found her natural point of aim, and squeezed the trigger with the same smooth precision she had demonstrated thousands of times on training ranges. The bullet found its mark, and the enemy fire from that position stopped immediately. Around her, the other Marines were still trying to pinpoint enemy locations, while she was already engaging her second target. The firefight lasted less than 10 minutes, but in that brief span of time, Maria's reputation within Bravo Company was permanently established. She had identified and neutralized 3 enemy positions while other Marines were still getting oriented to the threat. Her accuracy under fire was beyond impressive. It was the kind of skill that saved lives and won battles. After the patrol returned to base, Captain Rodriguez pulled Maria aside for a private conversation. The initial skepticism in his voice had been replaced by something approaching respect. "Santos, I've been doing this for a long time, and I've worked with some outstanding marksmen. What you did out there today was exceptional. Mitchell tells me the men are starting to come around, and after today, I can see why." That evening, as Maria cleaned her rifle and prepared her equipment for the next day's mission, she felt something she hadn't experienced since arriving in Afghanistan: acceptance. The Marines of Bravo Company were beginning to see her not as an experiment or a symbol, but as a fellow warrior who could be trusted to watch their backs when the shooting started. It was the first step in a journey that would ultimately lead to a moment when 50 Marines would depend on her skill to survive the deadliest firefight of their lives. But for now, Maria was content to have proven that she belonged in Afghanistan, that she could function under fire, and that her years of training and preparation had equipped her for the realities of combat in one of the world's most dangerous places. The real tests were still to come, but she had taken the first crucial step toward earning the trust and respect of the Marines she had come to serve alongside. The weeks following Maria's first firefight brought a subtle but unmistakable shift in the atmosphere around Bravo Company. Where once there had been skeptical glances and carefully neutral conversations, there was now genuine curiosity and grudging respect. Marines who had initially kept their distance began including her in the informal discussions that took place during downtime, and veterans who had previously viewed her as an unknown quantity started seeking her input on tactical matters. Corporal Jake Williams, a 22-year-old from rural Montana who served as one of the unit's designated marksmen, was among the first to genuinely embrace Maria's presence. Williams had grown up hunting in terrain not unlike the mountains of Afghanistan, and he recognized exceptional shooting ability when he saw it. The day after the checkpoint firefight, he approached Maria with a proposition that would become the foundation for an unlikely but highly effective partnership. "Santos, I've been watching how you work, and I think we could learn from each other," Williams said as they prepared for another patrol. "You got skills I've never seen before, but I know this terrain and these tactics. Maybe we could share some knowledge." What began as an informal exchange of techniques quickly evolved into something more significant. Williams taught Maria about reading the wind patterns in Afghan mountains, about how the extreme temperature variations affected bullet trajectory, and about the subtle signs that indicated enemy movement in the rocky landscape. In return, Maria shared advanced marksmanship techniques she had learned during years of intensive training, breathing control methods that improved accuracy under stress, and tactical positioning strategies that maximized effectiveness while minimizing exposure. Their partnership caught the attention of other Marines, and soon Maria found herself conducting impromptu training sessions during the quiet hours between missions. She demonstrated proper scope adjustment techniques, explained the mathematics of long-range shooting, and shared insights about maintaining equipment in the harsh Afghan environment. These sessions served a dual purpose. They improved the overall marksmanship skills of the entire unit while breaking down the social barriers that had initially separated Maria from her fellow Marines. Lieutenant Sarah Chun, the company's intelligence officer, became another key ally in Maria's gradual integration. Chun had faced her own challenges as one of the few women in a male-dominated unit, and she understood the additional pressure that came with being constantly evaluated and judged. She helped Maria navigate the complex social dynamics of military life in a combat zone, while also providing valuable intelligence about enemy tactics and movements that informed Maria's approach to each mission. The intelligence picture in Helmand Province was becoming increasingly concerning. Taliban forces were adapting their tactics in response to coalition operations, using more sophisticated weapons and demonstrating improved coordination between different cells. Sniper attacks on Marine patrols had increased dramatically, with enemy marksmen using the rugged terrain to their advantage and then disappearing before coalition forces could respond effectively. Captain Rodriguez recognized that Maria's unique skills could provide a significant advantage in countering these threats. He began incorporating her into mission planning sessions, asking for her assessment of potential sniper positions and her recommendations for counter-sniper operations. Her ability to think like an enemy marksman while understanding coalition tactics gave her insights that proved invaluable in preventing attacks and neutralizing threats. The breakthrough moment in Maria's relationship with Bravo Company came during a complex operation designed to clear a Taliban stronghold in a valley that had been used to stage attacks on coalition supply convoys. The operation required careful coordination between multiple units, with precise timing and exceptional marksmanship to neutralize enemy positions while minimizing friendly casualties. Maria was positioned on a ridgeline overlooking the target area, tasked with providing overwatch for the Marines advancing through the valley below. Her position gave her a commanding view of the terrain, but it also made her a prime target for any enemy forces that might be concealed in the surrounding hills. It was the kind of assignment that required not just exceptional shooting skills, but the mental toughness to remain calm and focused while potentially under fire. As the operation began, Maria methodically scanned the valley through her scope, looking for any sign of enemy movement or prepared positions. The Taliban had been using this area for months, and intelligence suggested they had developed elaborate defensive positions designed to channel attacking forces into kill zones where they could be engaged from multiple directions simultaneously. The first sign of trouble came from a direction no one had anticipated. While the main assault force was advancing through the valley floor, enemy fighters emerged from concealed positions on the opposite ridgeline, directly threatening the Marines below with enfilading fire that could devastate the entire unit. The Marines in the valley had no cover from this unexpected angle of attack, and their only hope was immediate suppression of the enemy positions. Maria didn't hesitate. She immediately shifted her position to engage the new threat, despite knowing that doing so would expose her to potential counterfire from enemy positions she hadn't yet identified. Through her scope, she could see Marines scrambling for cover while enemy fire kicked up dust clouds around their positions. Every second of delay meant more Marines in danger. Her first shot eliminated an enemy fighter who was preparing to fire a rocket-propelled grenade into the midst of the advancing Marines. The second shot neutralized a machine gun position that had been raking the valley floor with devastating automatic fire. Within moments, Maria had identified and engaged 5 separate enemy positions, buying crucial time for the Marines below to reach cover and organize their own response. But the Taliban fighters weren't finished. As Maria engaged the known positions, additional enemy forces revealed themselves by opening fire on her ridge position. Suddenly, she found herself in a deadly duel with multiple enemy marksmen who were trying to eliminate the threat she posed to their ambush. Bullets began striking the rocks around her position, sending stone fragments flying and making accurate return fire extremely difficult. This was the moment that would define Maria's reputation within Bravo Company forever. Instead of seeking cover or calling for extraction, she methodically worked through each enemy position, using her superior training and equipment to engage threats that other Marines couldn't even see. Her calm professionalism under the most intense pressure possible demonstrated not just exceptional skill, but the kind of courage and dedication that marked true warriors. Corporal Williams, monitoring the radio traffic from his position with the main assault force, later described listening to Maria's calm, precise reports as she engaged target after target while under heavy fire herself. She never sounded rattled, never sounded stressed, he would tell other Marines. She just calmly identified targets, engaged them, and moved on to the next threat. It was like listening to a training exercise, except people were shooting back. The firefight in the valley lasted nearly 2 hours, but Maria's initial intervention had prevented what could have been a catastrophic ambush. Her accurate fire had neutralized the most dangerous enemy positions and allowed the assault force to complete their mission successfully. When the after-action reports were compiled, her actions were credited with saving multiple Marine lives and ensuring the success of the entire operation. That evening, as the unit settled into a defensive perimeter for the night, something had fundamentally changed in the way Bravo Company viewed Maria. The casual conversations that had begun after her first firefight evolved into genuine camaraderie. Marines who had previously maintained professional distance began including her in the tight-knit groups that formed naturally in combat units. Most importantly, she had earned something that couldn't be awarded or mandated: the complete trust of Marines who knew she would risk everything to keep them safe. Sergeant Mitchell, whose initial skepticism had been evident to everyone in the unit, made a point of speaking with Maria privately after the Valley operation. His weathered face carried a slight smile as he offered what amounted to the highest praise one Marine could give another. "Santos, I owe you an apology. When you first showed up here, I thought you might be good, but I wasn't sure you'd be one of us. Today you prove that you're not just a good Marine, you're family. These men will follow you anywhere now, because they know you'll do whatever it takes to bring them home." For Maria, the acceptance was deeply meaningful, but it also brought new responsibilities. She was no longer just proving herself. She was setting an example for every woman who might follow in her footsteps. Her success or failure would influence policy decisions and shape attitudes about women in combat for years to come. It was a burden she carried willingly, knowing that her performance in Afghanistan could open doors for future generations of female Marines. As she cleaned her rifle that night and prepared for the next day's mission, Maria reflected on the journey that had brought her to this point. From the rejection letters and bureaucratic obstacles to earning the respect and trust of some of the finest Marines in the Corps, she had overcome every challenge through dedication, skill, and an unwavering commitment to excellence. But she also knew that her biggest test was still ahead, waiting somewhere in the dangerous landscape of Helmand Province, where 50 Marines would soon depend on her exceptional abilities to survive the deadliest encounter of their lives. The mission briefing on March 15th felt different from the dozens that had preceded it. Captain Rodriguez stood before the assembled Marines of Bravo Company with a gravity that immediately commanded attention, his usually confident demeanor tempered by the sobering intelligence they had received during the night. The Taliban had been massing forces in the Sanjan district, preparing for what intelligence analysts believed would be a major offensive against coalition positions throughout Helmand Province. "Gentlemen, and Santos," Rodriguez began, acknowledging Maria with the casual inclusion that had become natural over the past months, "we've been tasked with a reconnaissance and disruption mission in Sector 7. Intelligence indicates the enemy has established a major staging area in the village of Karyi-Kalin, approximately 30 kilometers northeast of our current position. Our job is to assess enemy strength, identify key positions, and, if possible, disrupt their operations before they can launch coordinated attacks against our supply lines." The map Rodriguez displayed showed terrain that would challenge even experienced Marines. The village sat in a narrow valley, surrounded by steep ridges that provided commanding views of all approaches. Multiple trails led in and out of the area, offering the enemy numerous escape routes while channeling attacking forces into predictable paths. It was exactly the kind of terrain that favored defenders who knew the ground and had time to prepare their positions. Lieutenant Chun provided the intelligence brief, outlining what they knew about enemy forces in the area. Satellite imagery showed increased activity around the village, with multiple structures that appeared to be fortified positions. Communications intercepts suggested the presence of a senior Taliban commander who was coordinating operations across the region. Most concerning were the reports of heavy weapons, including mortars and possibly anti-aircraft systems that could threaten coalition helicopters attempting to provide support or extraction. Maria studied the terrain maps and aerial photographs with the focused intensity that had become her trademark. The ridgeline surrounding the target area offered excellent positions for long-range observation and precision fire, but they also presented significant challenges. The distances involved would test the limits of her equipment and training, while the complex terrain would make movement and communication difficult once the mission began. Sergeant Mitchell outlined the tactical plan with methodical precision. The company would approach the target in 3 elements, with the main assault force moving through the valley, while Overwatch teams positioned on the surrounding ridges provided security and fire support. Maria would be part of the primary Overwatch team, positioned on the highest point overlooking the village, where she could observe enemy movements and engage threats as they developed. The insertion would be conducted before dawn, using helicopters to transport the Marines to positions several kilometers from the target area. From there, they would move on foot through difficult terrain, timing their arrival to begin observations just as the sun rose and activity in the village became visible. The plan allowed for rapid extraction if the situation became untenable, but everyone understood that once they were on the ground, they would be operating in enemy territory with limited support options. As the briefing concluded, Rodriguez pulled Maria aside for a private conversation that would prove prophetic. Santos, I want you to understand the critical nature of your role in this operation. Your position will give you the best view of the entire target area, which means you'll be our primary intelligence collector and our most important fire support asset. If things go bad down there, a lot of Marines are going to be counting on your ability to see threats they can't see and engage targets they can't reach. Maria nodded, understanding the weight of responsibility being placed on her shoulders. She had proven herself in multiple firefights over the past months, but this mission would test her abilities in ways she had never experienced before. The distances involved would require precision shooting at the extreme limits of her equipment's capabilities, while the complex tactical situation would demand split-second decisions that could mean the difference between mission success and catastrophic failure. The helicopter insertion went smoothly, with both aircraft delivering their Marines to the designated landing zones without encountering enemy fire. As the aircraft disappeared into the pre-dawn darkness, the Marines began the challenging movement toward their observation positions. Maria's team had the longest and most difficult route, climbing nearly 1,000 feet through rocky terrain in complete darkness while carrying equipment that would allow them to observe and engage targets at ranges exceeding 800 meters. The climb was exhausting, but Maria had trained extensively for this type of operation. Her physical conditioning allowed her to maintain the pace while carrying her precision rifle system, ammunition, and the additional equipment needed for extended observation. Corporal Williams accompanied her team, bringing his own marksmanship skills and his knowledge of the local terrain that had proven invaluable during previous operations. They reached their observation position just as the first hint of dawn appeared on the eastern horizon. Maria immediately began establishing her shooting position, using natural rock formations to create a stable platform for her rifle while minimizing her profile against the skyline. Williams set up the spotting scope and communications equipment that would allow them to coordinate with other elements of the operation. As the sun rose over the valley, the scope of the Taliban operation became clear. The village below was bustling with activity that had nothing to do with normal civilian life. Armed fighters moved between buildings in tactical formations. Heavy weapons were positioned in carefully prepared emplacements, and supply convoys arrived carrying ammunition and equipment. Intelligence estimates had been conservative. There were significantly more enemy fighters present than anyone had anticipated. Maria began the methodical process of cataloging enemy positions and assessing potential threats to the Marines who would soon be moving through the valley below. Through her scope, she could identify individual fighters, observe their weapons and equipment, and map the defensive positions they had established throughout the village. The Taliban had clearly been preparing for this operation for weeks, possibly months, and they had turned the village into a formidable stronghold. Captain Rodriguez's voice crackled through the radio as the main assault force began their approach to the village. Overwatch 1, this is Bravo 6. What's your assessment of the target area? Maria keyed her radio, providing a detailed report of enemy strength and positions that immediately changed the tactical picture. The enemy force was at least 3 times larger than intelligence estimates had suggested, with heavy weapons positioned to cover all likely approaches to the village. Most concerning was the presence of what appeared to be foreign fighters, identifiable by their different equipment and tactical behavior. These were not local Taliban militia. They were experienced combatants who had likely fought coalition forces in multiple theaters. The decision was made to abort the original assault plan and shift to pure reconnaissance, but the Taliban had other ideas. As the Marines attempted to withdraw from their advanced positions, enemy observers spotted the movement and immediately triggered the alert that would bring disaster down upon Bravo Company. The ambush was perfectly executed, demonstrating a level of tactical sophistication that caught the Marines completely off guard. Instead of waiting for the coalition forces to attack the village, the Taliban had established secondary positions along the likely withdrawal routes, turning the Marines' attempt at tactical withdrawal into a fighting retreat through terrain that heavily favored the defending force. Within minutes, 50 Marines found themselves trapped in a natural amphitheater surrounded by enemy positions on 3 sides. The 4th side offered a potential escape route, but it required movement across open ground that was covered by enemy fire. Captain Rodriguez quickly established a defensive perimeter, but everyone understood that their position was untenable without immediate support or a miracle. Maria watched the disaster unfold through her scope with growing desperation. From her elevated position, she could see enemy fighters moving to surround the trapped Marines, while heavy weapons teams established firing positions that would make escape impossible. The range to most enemy positions exceeded 600 meters, a challenging shot under the best conditions, nearly impossible given the stress of watching fellow Marines fight for their lives. Williams worked frantically with the communications equipment, calling for helicopter support, artillery, and any other assistance that might be available. The responses were uniformly negative. The nearest helicopter support was 40 minutes away, artillery was out of range, and no other friendly forces were close enough to provide immediate assistance. Bravo Company was on their own, trapped in enemy territory with no way out except through the Taliban forces that surrounded them. The firefight began with devastating intensity as Taliban fighters opened fire from multiple directions simultaneously. Marines scrambled for whatever cover they could find in terrain that offered little protection from the plunging fire coming from the surrounding ridges. Rodriguez's voice on the radio reflected the desperate nature of their situation as he called for immediate extraction while knowing that no help was coming in time to save them. Maria made the most important decision of her military career in that crystalline moment of absolute clarity. The Book of Regulations said she was in a support role, officially prohibited from direct combat operations. The voice of caution urged her to maintain her position and continue providing intelligence support, while hoping that somehow the trapped Marines could fight their way out of an impossible situation. But 50 Marines were going to die if someone didn't act immediately, and she was the only person in position to make a difference. She settled behind her rifle with the calm precision that had defined her entire military career, knowing that the next few minutes would test everything she had learned during years of training and months of combat experience. Through her scope, she could see Taliban fighters moving into positions that would allow them to pour devastating fire into the Marine perimeter. The closest enemy position was 847 meters away, at the extreme limit of her effective range, but not beyond her capabilities if everything went perfectly. Maria controlled her breathing, found her natural point of aim, and began the most important engagement of her life. Time seemed to slow as Maria aligned her crosshairs on the first target, a Taliban fighter preparing to fire a rocket-propelled grenade directly into the center of the trapped Marine formation. At 847 meters, the target appeared impossibly small through her scope, barely more than a silhouette against the rocky backdrop of the Afghan mountainside. The morning wind was gusting unpredictably, adding another variable to calculations that were already at the extreme limits of precision shooting. Maria's breathing became controlled and rhythmic as her training took over completely. She had fired thousands of rounds at targets at this distance during training, but never with 50 lives hanging in the balance. Never with the sound of incoming fire and desperate radio calls filling her ears. Never with the absolute knowledge that missing meant watching her fellow Marines die in a valley where there was nowhere to hide and no hope of rescue. The first shot was perfect. The bullet traveled its trajectory in just over a second, covering the distance with deadly accuracy. Through her scope, Maria saw the enemy fighter collapse, the RPG falling from his hands just moments before he would have fired it into the Marine perimeter. But there was no time to appreciate the success. There were dozens of other targets, and the Taliban were already beginning to realize that someone was engaging them from an unexpected direction. Williams, positioned beside her with the spotting scope, began calling out targets with the kind of professional calm that came from months of working together under pressure. Maria, machine gun position, 11 o'clock, range 750 meters. 2 fighters behind the stone wall. Maria shifted smoothly to the new target, her muscle memory guiding the rifle to the correct position while her mind calculated the slight adjustments needed for the different range and wind conditions. The machine gun team was already firing into the Marine position, their automatic weapons creating a deadly crossfire that was pinning down the entire company. Eliminating this position was critical to giving the Marines any chance of movement. Her second and third shots came in rapid succession, each finding its mark with surgical precision. The machine gun fell silent, its crew eliminated by shooting that bordered on the impossible given the range and conditions. But Maria was already moving to the next target, and the next, working through enemy positions with methodical efficiency that demonstrated why she had been considered the finest marksman in her training class. Down in the valley, Captain Rodriguez couldn't understand what was happening. Enemy fire that had been building to overwhelming intensity was suddenly being reduced position by position. Key threats were being eliminated faster than his Marines could even identify them. His radio crackled with Williams' voice, providing the explanation that would enter Marine Corps legend. Bravo 6, this is Overwatch 1. Santos is engaging enemy positions from the North Ridge. She's taken out the RPG team and the primary machine gun position. Stand by for continued fire support. Rodriguez felt a surge of hope mixed with amazement. He had known that Maria was exceptional, but what she was doing defied everything he understood about the limits of precision shooting. The ranges involved, the speed of engagement, the accuracy under pressure. It was beyond anything he had seen in multiple combat deployments. But Maria was far from finished. Taliban fighters throughout the valley were beginning to react to the unexpected threat from the ridge, redirecting some of their fire toward her position while others attempted to maneuver to cover. This gave the trapped Marines their first breathing room since the ambush began, but it also meant that Maria was now drawing direct fire from multiple enemy positions. Bullets began impacting the rocks around her position, sending stone fragments flying and making precise aim increasingly difficult. The Taliban had identified her general location and were concentrating fire in an attempt to neutralize the threat she posed. Any rational person would have sought cover, called for extraction, or at minimum shifted to a less exposed position. Maria did none of these things. Instead, she continued her methodical engagement of enemy positions, prioritizing targets based on the threat they posed to the Marines below. A sniper team that had been engaging individual Marines from a concealed position became her next priority. The range was nearly 900 meters at the absolute limit of her equipment's effective capability, but the enemy marksmen had already wounded 2 Marines and were continuing to take careful aimed shots. Finding the enemy snipers required patience and skill that went beyond simple marksmanship. They were using excellent concealment and discipline, firing only briefly before changing positions. Maria had to anticipate where they would appear next, pre-positioning her rifle and waiting for the split second when they would expose themselves to take their next shot. When the opportunity came, Maria was ready. Her shot was so perfectly timed that she fired at almost the exact moment the enemy sniper's rifle appeared through a gap in the rocks. The bullet found its target before the Taliban fighter could even acquire his intended Marine victim. The second sniper, reacting to his partner's fate, exposed himself for just a moment too long as he tried to identify the source of the incoming fire. Maria's follow-up shot eliminated him before he could relocate to a safer position. Williams, monitoring radio traffic from the valley below, could hear the change in tone as the Marines realized they had been given a fighting chance. Rodriguez was reorganizing his defensive perimeter, preparing to bound by teams toward the extraction point that had seemed impossibly far away just minutes earlier. But they still needed time and continued suppression of enemy positions to make movement possible. Maria provided both. For the next 20 minutes, she maintained a rate of precision fire that would have been impressive on a training range, let alone under combat conditions, while receiving direct fire from multiple enemy positions. She eliminated machine gun teams, mortar crews, and individual fighters who posed immediate threats to Marine movement. Her ammunition supply was running dangerously low, but she continued engaging targets with the knowledge that every shot had to count. The Taliban response was becoming increasingly desperate and uncoordinated as their carefully planned ambush devolved into chaos. Key leaders had been eliminated by Maria's precision fire. Communications were disrupted, and the psychological impact of watching position after position fall to an unseen marksman was undermining their fighting effectiveness. What had begun as a perfect ambush was turning into a disaster for the attackers. Captain Rodriguez seized the opportunity, ordering his Marines to begin bounding movement toward the extraction zone, while Maria continued to provide overwatch. The movement was still dangerous, requiring short rushes across open ground while under fire, but it was now possible because the most dangerous enemy positions had been neutralized. As the Marines began their tactical withdrawal, Maria faced her most difficult decision yet. Her ammunition was nearly exhausted, her position was receiving increasingly accurate enemy fire, and Williams was urgently recommending that they begin their own withdrawal toward the extraction point. But there were still enemy positions that posed a threat to the Marines moving through the valley below, and abandoning her position now could allow those threats to regroup and devastate the withdrawing force. Maria made her choice with the same calm determination that had characterized her entire military career. She would remain in position until every Marine was safely out of the kill zone, regardless of the personal risk. Williams, understanding her decision without need for explanation, stayed beside her to continue spotting targets and maintaining communications with the Marines below. Her final engagement came as a group of Taliban fighters attempted to establish a new firing position that would allow them to enfilade the Marine withdrawal route. The position was over 950 meters away, beyond the normal effective range of her equipment, and complicated by difficult terrain that made range estimation extremely challenging. But the enemy fighters were setting up a machine gun that could devastate the Marines if allowed to open fire. Maria's final shot of the engagement was perhaps her most remarkable. Accounting for the extreme range, the crosswind that had been building throughout the morning, and the elevated shooting position, she made the subtle adjustments that precision shooting demanded. The bullet traveled for nearly 2 seconds before finding its target, eliminating the machine gun team just as they completed their setup. That shot broke the will of the remaining Taliban fighters, who began withdrawing from their positions rather than face continued engagement with an adversary they couldn't see but couldn't escape. The ambush was over, and 50 Marines were alive because of shooting that would be analyzed and discussed in military academies for decades to come. The extraction helicopters arrived to find Bravo Company consolidated at the landing zone, battered but intact. As Maria finally left her overwatch position and rejoined the main force, she was greeted with a silence that spoke more powerfully than any words could have. These Marines had watched her save their lives through shooting that defied rational explanation, and they understood that they had witnessed something that would be remembered long after the war in Afghanistan was over. Captain Rodriguez approached Maria as they waited for the helicopters to land, his face reflecting emotions that went beyond simple gratitude. "Santos, what you did today, I don't have words for it. You saved every Marine in this company. That's not hyperbole, that's simply fact." The flight back to base gave Maria time to process what had happened and what it would mean for her future and the future of women in combat roles. She had proven beyond any doubt that gender was irrelevant when lives were on the line and skill was what mattered. The bureaucratic arguments and regulatory obstacles that had once seemed insurmountable now appeared petty and meaningless in the face of what she had accomplished. News of the engagement spread quickly through the military command structure, reaching levels where policy decisions were made and precedents were set. The after-action reports documented shooting that was unprecedented in modern military history. 17 confirmed enemy kills at ranges exceeding 600 meters, all while under direct fire and with 50 friendly lives hanging in the balance. Within weeks, the combat exclusion policies that had once barred Maria from frontline service were being reconsidered and ultimately overturned. Her actions had provided irrefutable proof that individual capability mattered more than arbitrary restrictions based on gender. The door she had forced open through exceptional skill and unwavering courage would allow countless other women to serve in roles that had previously been denied to them. But for Maria, the recognition and policy changes were secondary to the knowledge that she had done her duty when it mattered most. She had used her exceptional abilities to save the lives of Marines who had accepted her as family, and in doing so, she had honored the memory of every woman who had served before her, and paved the way for every woman who would serve after her. The rejection letter that had once seemed to end her dreams still sat in her desk drawer, but it no longer defined her future. Through one perfect shot that traveled 847 meters through the Afghan desert air, Staff Sergeant Maria Santos had rewritten the rules of war and proven that heroism knows no gender when lives are on the line, and courage is what counts.